Clerk, may I have the roll call, please?
Yes, Councillor Kirby-Young, Councillor Dominato, Councillor Fry is in the chair, Councillor Boyle, Councillor Montague, Archie Johnson, external representative, is here on video, and Karen Keatley expressed her regrets, also an external representative. The meeting has quorum, Chair Fry.
Thanks, Clerk. Before we begin, I have some announcements. Any comments on the agenda items can be sent to the committee using the web form on the city's website. The link to that form will be tweeted out on @VanCityClerk. I also want to note the City of Vancouver's longstanding commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, including utmost respect for all genders. And I remind committee members that when addressing speakers and staff, we will avoid using gendered honorifics and instead refer to the person by first and last name, role, or title. There are 3 items of business on today's agenda, 2 reports and 1 staff proposal for the 2023 meeting plan and schedule. The first item on the agenda is amendments to the City of Vancouver's policies, and I'd now like to invite Mike McDonnell, the city's Auditor General, to introduce the item. Mike?
Good morning. Thank you, Chair, committee members. There's no presentation for the first item on our agenda. Updates to the city's travel, corporate, purchasing card, and financial spending authority policies were identified by city staff during a review of policies that were applicable to my office. The proposed changes are entirely housekeeping in nature, and I'm asking the committee to recommend them to council for approval. Budget process. The bylaw calls for me to present a budget request to this committee, which in turn is responsible for submitting a recommendation to council on the budget for my office. I do have some slides. We're just going to get them up in a moment.
Just the clerk here, we're getting the slides up. If you could give us a moment, thank you.
While we're waiting for that, seeing Councillor Kirby-Young on the request to speak queue. Oh, okay, thanks.
So we can hop over to the next slide, please. I start my presentation with an update on how 2022 actual spending compared to the council approved budget. Last year, council approved a total budget of $1.6 million for my office. I said at the time that if funds weren't needed, I wouldn't be looking for ways to spend them, and I've stuck with that. I estimate that at year end, my office will come in about $480,000 under budget. Positive variances for operating costs are entirely due to delays in getting people into positions and, as a result, delayed starts for the audits that are currently underway. The positive variance for capital costs relates to a delay in acquisition of audit software, which the city's IT department was not able to support this year, but will be in the upcoming year. Costs were included in the roll forward included in the city's overall capital budget, so do not form part of my budget request for this year. Next slide, please. This slide presents the budget I'm requesting for 2023 compared to my 2022 budget. The increase of $405,000 is comprised primarily of allowances for salaries, legal costs, and audit subject matter experts, offset to a small extent by the one-time items for my office's initial setup that aren't needed again now that we're fully operational. I'll go through each line item separately. Can I have the next slide, please? The single biggest change from last year relates to salaries and benefits, which are up $397,000. This is comprised of the cost of employing my current team of 8 for the entire year. Team members were hired incrementally throughout 2022, with my last team member joining us in October, actually on Halloween. There's an allowance of $128,000 for cost of living and merit increases in accordance with city policies for excluded staff. I'm asking for your support for 2 additional positions to support the whistleblowing mandate Council has directed me to assume. My intention is to hire these positions in the latter half of 2023 after a revised whistleblower policy has been presented to and approved by Council. I'm asking for an increase for contracted services of $50,000, half of which relates to subject matter experts which are retained for each of our audits in accordance with professional auditing standards. The other half being an allowance for independent legal consultations in support of the work. The city's in-house legal team has been most supportive, and I'm very appreciative of that support. But as an independent audit office, there are situations from time to time we need to seek legal independent guidance. Lastly, I'm asking for an increase of $20,000 for costs related to the maintenance of licenses and professional designations held by my team. The qualifications of my team in accounting, audit, information technology, and fraud investigation are a big part of why specific people were hired, why I brought them on in the first place, and are integral to providing you with high quality and professional work. The next slide, please. This is my budget request in summary. $1.7 million to retain my existing team with the addition of 2 whistleblowing team members later in the year. $247,000 for contracted services, 65% of which support our audit service subject matter experts, 16% for quality assurance contractors, 10% for legal services, and 9% for audit publications. There's $15,000 for training throughout the year, and $50,000 to cover the costs of things like software licenses, professional designations for team members, and miscellaneous costs for maintaining the office, phones and supplies and whatnot. Next slide, please. I take the value for money component of my mandate quite seriously and believe it's important for my office to lead by example in this area. I'd like to point out some of the cost-saving efforts I've made in putting this budget together. As an independent office, the case could easily be made to keep it fully separate from city services, but I've decided not to go down that road. And use city services wherever it's feasible and effective. We have space, for instance, in the West Annex, a city-owned building, rather than renting out a private third-party owned space. We're taking used furniture from city stores rather than buying new furniture. We've been using the city's internal HR department for our hiring and support services rather than using recruitment agencies. And we've used IT support for our secure file storage, email, and web page services. So far, all the training that we've done has been pretty much in-house, except for with one exception. And we'll continue to do the same going forward to the extent that's possible, rather than paying outsiders. It's an old saying, when one person teaches, 2 people learn. That's something that we'd like to follow in our group. So perhaps with the exception of rent, none of these items are financially significant on their own, but when taken together over time, small savings like these can amount to something significant. Next slide, please. So that concludes the presentation, if there are any questions.
Thanks, Mike. We do have questions, starting with Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Before I start, can I move for a second round just in case we need it? Hoping
Sure.
not, but just
Yep.
in case.
All in favor, second round? Seeing none opposed. Okay, please proceed.
Okay, I'll start now. Thanks for the report. Starting kind of with the high-level questions, and I knew that sort of in the instigation of this office and the setup, it was envisioned that it would be sort of a staggered process towards sort of a fully actualized year. So my question is, the $2 million budget that is being requested, does this represent, sort of other than ongoing increases, a full year with full staff in place and a regularized anticipated cost for the Office of the OAG.
With the exception of the two requested whistleblower staff, this would represent the ongoing cost of the office. The whistleblowing component of it was, I'm just going back on my slides, about $75,000 through the year. So it would be higher in the following year because we'd have them for the entire year. So that would take us up to approximately 2.2 in total. And that would be a sort of a steady state going forward.
Okay, and can you recall if was $2 million the projected annual cost that we had estimated when the office was set up?
Yes, it was. That's exactly in line with what we had initially anticipated. But of course, there's inflation and other things that come along that increase that over time. And then I'm looking at an addition of 2 staff, which were over and above what my initial plans were to fund whistleblowing.
Okay. The other question that I have, because I know that a big part of this office is sort of value for money and looking at that, is that in the additional 400,000 for salaries, the variance you've shown, some of it is the year-round employment based on pacing. And then there's also 128,000 for cost of living and merit increases. Can you provide some context around that? Arguably, somebody might say, well, these staff have only been in place for a year. And how much of that is cost of living versus merit and haven't been in the job for a particularly long period of time?
It's a fairly normal progression, as I understand it, Councillor Kirby-Young, with respect to when you bring a new excluded staff person on board with the city, that they start within a range, and usually somewhere in the middle of that range, sometimes lower, sometimes higher. But the expectation is that there would then be an annual increment, which is done, I believe, mid-year, part of a formal assessment process of competence and what's been done. And then what comes with that is a normal lift. There are normal lift for regular performance and then exceptional lift for exceptional performance. But for the most part, there's a lift. And then there's just the normal cost of living increase that I'm trying to anticipate based on what will be done for the rest of city staff.
Okay, I guess I'm asking the question that arguably we haven't hit our stride yet, and we've delivered sort of, an initial whistleblowing report. And so how, so not delving into HR matters, but just, which wouldn't be appropriate in this context, but just to run the fiscal responsibility, is it really around competitiveness and merit at this point, or should merit be coming later on in terms of spending when we're actually getting some more substantive reports underway because the office now has the capacity to deliver those?
Again, I'm really just following my understanding of what normal HR policies for city staff are. There's nothing unusual with respect to this.
Okay. The other question that I have, and thanks for that, is really around sort of the intention. I know in a lot of the research when the Auditor General Committee was set up, it had shown sort of a net positive, obviously many benefits, right? Sometimes you can affirm that city spending is happening effectively and efficiently in some areas. Sometimes you identify opportunities where it's not, or for efficiencies, but the other jurisdictions did demonstrate the ability to have cost savings over time that sort of, in a sense offset the annual cost of having the Auditor General Office. Can you comment if you still see us being on a trajectory towards being able to demonstrate savings?
It's the topic of some debate in the professional community. There's actually very few legislative audit offices that publish what they feel would be the positive financial results from their work. There's one particular exception, and that's the City of Toronto, which does, and the city auditor there estimates that the cost savings or revenue lift, either side, positive impact on the bottom line from their work is approximately between $7 and $8 per dollar spent in the audit office. I have in my service plan that I presented to you last year that I'm looking to break even over the course of 5 years. It's a little less aggressive, but perhaps more reasonable given that we're just getting started. I think you'll see, though, with our initial audits that we have our first one being released in January and another one in February, that they will be contributing towards that calculation. The idea being that overall, yes, there should be a net benefit to the city for the existence of this office over and above, and then that's a quantifiable benefit. And that's just over and above the positive impact of having an auditor in place. There are some projects that don't necessarily have that sort of financial implication. So for instance, I have an audit of equity, and it's difficult to put a dollar figure associated with that. So not every project will contribute towards that bottom line calculation. And I don't want to exclude really valuable work because of that. But I think it's important that we keep track because my office needs to be accountable as much as any other part of the city.
Okay, that's my time. I might come back on. Thanks.
Yep. And Councillor Dominato.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to circle back on the budget request, specifically the contracted services. And if you could just elaborate on the role of those different experts in your office, because you're obviously bringing on full-time permanent staff, but what's the role of the contracted services?
Absolutely. The contracted service positions are predominantly subject matter experts. So under our Canadian audit standards, we have to have sufficient expertise in order to perform the audit that we're subject matter area that we're looking at. I've employed a team of generalists. They have specific skills in different areas, but say for instance, we've been looking at the city's acquisition of office furnishings. Well, we brought 2 contractors in who are experts in procurement. I think between the two of them, they have somewhere along the lines of 60 or 65 years of combined experience. Their depth of knowledge in areas like the impact of international trade agreements on the city's purchasing policies and what it is obliged to do as a public sector procurer, it would take my staff months to acquire that level of knowledge, and probably never to the degree that these people have it. So the business case is obvious for having them on as contractors, bring the capacity in when it's needed, and then turn it off when it's no longer needed, rather than buying it through employment. That's one type of expert. We have another kind of subject matter expert who in certain circumstances might actually do the work. So in my audit plan, I have an audit of cybersecurity, not in the upcoming year, but in the year following. And that's an area that is so specialized and so specific that it's a skill that I would anticipate we will probably want subject matter experts to physically be doing the work with our oversight and guidance. And but we will still have advisors advising us in relation to the nature of the work. So every audit will have the advisors that come in the planning oversight phase, but there's some that will have actually contractors physically doing the work. The other part, as I mentioned in the presentation, was for legal services, independent of the city. We also have quality control reviewers. So our audit standards require that for any high-risk audit, and by the way, every performance audit is considered high risk, we will have what's called an EQR, an engagement quality reviewer. And that's essentially, in the private sector, that would be a second partner reviewing the work. The idea being that this individual with no knowledge of the work that we've actually done is able to reach the same conclusions that we've reached by looking at just simply the documentation and the evidence that we've put together. And this person makes sure that we're complying with audit standards and signs off on that. We have another one that's called a technical reviewer, and it's the same idea. It helps the team. Essentially, it's another person to bounce ideas off with respect to main messaging, compliance with standards, and just general formatting. So yeah, that's all of our contractors.
That's helpful. And just last question with respect to budget is arguably the point was made that this is roughly 2 million is what was anticipated for this office. And is this on par with other jurisdictions, a similar size in terms of an auditor general office?
My understanding is that the size of the office and the overall budget is very much on par. Some offices have more staff, fewer contractors, others go the other way. I'm striking a balance that I'm comfortable with and I think best serves the city's interests.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Dominato. Councillor Boyle. Oh, sorry, I just skipped over there. We hit that at the same time. All right, there we go. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. I am going to start with a question that I was just trying to find the answer to, but I suspect you know it. Is the 2 million request before us part of the current state budget that staff have put forward, or do you recall what the amount for the?
Yes, it is. This is the amount that I provided to the finance department as was going to be part of this. Now, obviously, it's a different process in the sense that I require your, if you will, support and recommendation to council, but they have included this figure in the preliminary figures.
Okay, that's great to know. And that was my next question. We, as a committee, approve a budget today and then we still need to reapprove it, I assume, in the.
Council as a whole has to approve it.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. My other question is, I know you have a set term. In other jurisdictions, is the Auditor General, I guess I'm trying to understand, is there work to do sort of in perpetuity, or is your sense that like over 7 years at an office this size, we dig into audits of enough departments that the office has sort of done its work? Or is this office anticipated to be this size for 7 more years, or this size until the end of things, or growing? I'm trying to get a trajectory of where we're going. And again, I'm new on this committee, so help me understand that.
I would hope the end of things is so far off that none of us can really anticipate it. But in terms of my own term, I would suggest that the current 8 team members, plus the 2 for whistleblowing, would be the steady state for the duration of my term, which is another 6 years. And as to what a successor might ask, I really don't know that I can speculate, but given that I believe that the size of the office, given the size of the city and the responsibilities is pretty much in line, that it would be challenging to seek more.
Okay. My other question is, have there been reductions in audit staffing on the city side to in whistleblowing as you take on that responsibility, or other internal audit functions as a result of the creation of an independent external office?
Well, it was before my time, but my understanding is that the city's internal audit department is about half the size of what it used to be. With respect to whistleblowing, it was never actually staffed. It was done off the corner of the desk, is my understanding. And I'm not comfortable with an off the corner of the desk approach for my team.
Yeah. Okay. Those are all my questions. Really appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Councillor Boyle.
Thanks, Councillor Roy. Councillor Kirby Young for round 2. Oh, okay, wait. Am I doing this or? Sorry,
I got it. Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to follow up just to kind of finish that point, because I felt it was a bit rushed at the end with respects to the trajectory around sort of this notion of the office recovering some of its costs or paying for itself. And you'd referenced Toronto, I think it's 7 to 8. And so can you just sort of recap the high level for that? Because I think the expectations or the interest from the public is, how does this show value? And that often translates into cost savings. Sometimes it's affirmation of your tax dollars are being spent well. Sometimes it's opportunities for savings. You talked about other principles like equity. So I just wondered if you could sort of finish off that framing, because I think it's an important point moving forward.
I mean, there's just a salutary, if you will, deterrent effect to the existence of an audit office. Knowing that something might be looked at, I think, inspires different behaviors. This is sort of the intention. Pretty hard to put a quantity, or pretty hard to quantify that. What we will do with our work is look at the obvious immediate financial implications, but then look at what perhaps the longer term. And the Toronto model is that they look at a 5-year. What would be the potential savings from our recommendations or the potential revenue increment over a 5-year period, and add that up. And so that's actually why I chose the 5-year period in my service plan, was because I think that does make sense. The recommendations we make today should have a lasting impact for years to come. But you can't claim victory forever. There has to be an endpoint, and 5 years seemed as reasonable a number as anything else. And so that's how we will be calculating it. And where we see obvious financial gains or opportunities, we will make that clear in the report itself. So that's an audited figure. And then look at what potential benefits may be reaped in future years. So the idea being, though, that the cost of our office should, at a bare minimum, be net zero.
Okay. That's clear, and I appreciate kind of the clarity for that. I think it's helpful because it's a new function and people are trying to understand it.
Absolutely.
The other question that I have is the timing of this report coming forward. And I know that in the next report, we're going to consider your budget request for 2024 will be brought forward in October. We already received as council an initial draft presentation of the 2023 budget. Council has yet to adopt it. I'm just wondering why we are late this year in terms of not syncing in with the city budget process, that this is coming after and potentially after council could have conceivably adopted a budget.
This was the first meeting that we could pull together post-election,
Ah, so it's the election
my
year.
understanding. So I coordinate those with the clerk's office, and the clerk is nodding at me. So yeah, this was as quick as it could be put into your schedules.
Okay, so it sounds like that might be a takeaway on our side to make sure we sync up in those off years or election years with the budget process, because otherwise we're out of sync, right?
This is my first run through with an election as well, so certainly something to try to get into your agendas earlier in 4 years hence, but we won't have that issue for the next 3.
Okay, and then follow up, and I should know the answer to this, but I'm hoping you do off the top of your head. Was this draft amount notionally included in the draft 2023 budget?
Yes, it is.
It is included. Okay.
Yes.
Just wanted to affirm that for the record also. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby.
Thanks, Councillor Kirby-Young. Seeing nobody else on the queue, would someone like to move a motion? Councillor Montague, all in favor? Seeing none opposed. Is there any discussion? Right? Yeah, no, that's, I guess we didn't need to. Okay, anyway. Okay, so seeing no discussion, all in favor of receiving this? Seeing none opposed, that passes, and that concludes item 2. Our final item is Auditor General Committee 2023 meeting plan. And the Auditor General will introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. The final item on the agenda today is the Auditor General Committee's meeting plan for 2023. The committee is required to develop an annual plan before the end of February to ensure it meets its obligations as defined in its own terms of reference that include meeting a minimum of 3 times a year and within 30 days of me issuing a report. You'll see we have dates allocated for the review of reports I'll be issuing in January, February, and December, as well as the date for me to present my 2024 budget in line with the city's overall budget development. There are also placeholder dates in June, July, and November to allow us to meet if needed. However, should there be no agenda items, placeholder meetings will be canceled in consultation with the chair. So I'm asking the committee to approve this proposed meeting schedule.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask a question with respects to sort of how set in stone and how much ability there is to adapt to new requests or opportunities that may come forward. And so, for example, I'm aware that the Vancouver Park Board has called notice on a motion they will consider in January to invite the Auditor General in potentially to do an audit of at their discretion or your discretion that they see fit with respect to park board operations. And then I'm looking at the plan, 2022 plan that you previously, excuse me, presented to the committee. And one of the items was the city park business coordination. So 2-part question is there linkage between those, and is there ability within the 2023 plan, if that motion passes, to potentially incorporate some of that work next year?
Could you repeat the first question? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first question.
Is how much flexibility there is to adapt to, so for example, if the park board passes that and invites the Auditor General in, is there a chance to fit that in? And also noting that there was one item that referenced city park coordination in the plan.
So I'll perhaps answer those questions in reverse, if I may.
Sure.
The work with the park board is something that I very much look forward to, and yes, it is part of my work plan, and it will be a project that, assuming the motion passes at the park board in January, that we will be commencing almost immediately. And that actual audit topic, though, will depend based on conversations that I have with the board and with senior management, at the park board, and we'll make an ultimate determination once we begin planning and learning a little bit more about it. In terms of flexibility, When I present my audit plan in January, the one thing I can say, the only certain thing about it is that it's certain to change. And having the flexibility and the opportunity to pivot, it's a little challenging with an office our size because we're also beginning work at the Vancouver Police Board. Those are two very large projects, but I do like to leave some capacity, if possible, for emerging issues and pivot as necessary. But it is difficult to drop something as large as, say, the audit that we're looking at, those two projects.
Thank you, because you segued beautifully into my next question, which was just an update on the status with the police board. I know there was previously a motion by this council as a suggestion that work might be undertaking with the VPD, and it was on your plan. But as I understand it, did need a similar process to what the park board is doing to be invited in to do that work. So I
Correct.
wonder if you could just provide an update on sort of the status of that and what the response from the police board was around that work.
So the motion from council last December was a motion that to request the police board to invite me in to do a piece of work, which is consistent with the requirements under the Auditor General bylaw. That motion did not actually come through until last month. And so we have preliminary meetings booked with board and senior staff early in January to get that project underway.
Okay. And are you able to identify publicly at this point describe what that means in terms of what does VPD performance monitoring mean?
We haven't started even the process of gathering information to really be able to speak to that. I put down topics in the audit plan based on an intention, but what the actual scope of the project is can't really nail down until we've actually begun the work and understand the specifics.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Pleasure. Thanks, Councilor Kirby.
Great. Thanks, Councilor Kirby-Young. And thanks, Mike. Would someone like to move a motion?
So-
By Councilor Kirby-Young. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Seeing none opposed? And I guess, are you fine with that, clerks? Doing it verbally? Great, thanks. Okay, well, that concludes our items on the agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn? Well, thank you, Councilor Boyle. All in favor say yay. Opposed, nay. All right, the motion carries unanimously and this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, clerks. Thanks, Mike.